Hello, I am here to talk about another true crime case. This is one of Hawaii's most enduring unsolved crimes. It's the murder of Lisa Au in 1982. There is still so much mystery surrounding Lisa's disappearance and death. Lisa was a beautiful 19-year-old girl who lived in Kailua, which is a small town on the windward side of Oahu. She was described by people who knew her as being very positive, a very happy person. She was very giving to other people. Now, to kind of understand some of this, if you haven't been to Oahu or you don't really know the area well, the windward side is the much less traveled side of the island. It's a lot less populated, a lot less affluent. There's really no touristy stuff there at all. So the one side you have Honolulu, Waikiki, all the touristy stuff. The North Shore has a lot of stuff for tourism, surfing, things like that. And then the windward side is pretty small villages, there ranches. There isn't really that much going on out there. And it also tends to get a lot of rain. And the island in general is full of microclimates depending on the season. So one part of it could be sunny and another part, 20-minute drive could be just raining all day. And climates tend to shift very quickly. The entire island is also only 44 miles long. So keep this in mind when we talk about distance here. The time it takes to travel, the distance could be a lot longer than you would think based on the miles, just because of the traffic patterns. Nothing on the island is really that far apart from each other. So although it could be raining in one part and completely sunny in the other due to the microclimates, it's really not that far of a distance. And even though it isn't that far, it's only 110 miles driving around Oahu Circle, which goes completely around the island. It can take up to 4 to 6 hours to completely drive around that, depending on traffic. Especially Honolulu area gets some really intense traffic, and at least like minimum of 3.5 hours to drive through without stopping at all. So going back to this case, a couple days before Wednesday, January 20th of 1982, Lisa met a huge milestone in her teen life when she got her driver's license. I know 19 seems pretty late for a lot of us, but she had just gotten her license, so she can now drive to her job. And on that one,
here's some of the residential areas of Kailua.
And then right turn.
And Kailua is the city where Lisa Au grew up with her parents and then lived with her best friend and also worked at the salon. Here are some of the more residential areas of Kailua. I have no idea where Lisa Au lived in Kailua. I know that when her car was found, she was about 1 mile from her parents' house and 2 miles from her apartment. So somewhere in this area, about 1 mile off the Pali Highway. Also, the salon that she worked at, I tried to look up, and I don't believe it is in existence any longer, at least not as the salon she was working at the time. Yeah, Kailua is super pretty mountain.
And on that Wednesday, Lisa finished work at the salon she was working at around 9 p.m. and drove to meet her boyfriend, Doug Holmes, at his sister's apartment, which was located in Makiki, which is across the island from where she was in Kailua. It was near Honolulu. On the way there, she stopped at a store called MJ's to get some poke to bring for a late dinner. It's traditional to bring something when you go over to someone's house. They were hanging out for a few hours when Lisa called her roommate, and who was also a co-worker at the salon. Her name was Candy Maines. She called her at 12:45, so very early now on Thursday morning, to let her know that she was about to head home. Okay, Hawaii gets a lot of rain. It isn't uncommon to drive in the rain there, but this night there was an absolute torrential downpour. Every report I read said it was just pouring rain. It was raining more than normal. It sounds like it could have been considered dangerous driving conditions for anybody, let alone a relatively inexperienced driver like Lisa. She was also there with her boyfriend and his sister, and we don't know if they were partying, intoxicated, inebriated in any way. I don't want to speculate on it. I just know it's not uncommon for people, especially of that age, to party when they get together. According to Doug's narrative, the couple left the apartment. They went downstairs and said their goodbyes, and then they got in their separate cars to head home. And he said that he did see Lisa get into her car, but he was also in the process of getting into his car at the time, and driving off, so he did not see her drive away. He just saw her get into the car. Lisa's parents are named Chester and Patrice, and they were very close to their daughter, and they would worry about her and her safety. They had to have been so concerned for her when her roommate Candy called them the next day to let them know that Lisa had not come home the night before and also had not shown up for her shift at work. So Lisa's parents called Doug right away, who had made it safely home to his dorm room at the University of Hawaii, where he was an engineering student. Doug's travel home was much closer to Makiki than where Lisa was headed. She had to basically cross the island, which is through mountains, basically. Doug immediately went out searching for his girlfriend and tried to retrace the path that she would have taken to get back to her home in Kailua. He expressed that at the time he was worried that Lisa may have gotten in an accident on her way home, especially with the hazardous conditions that were going on at the time with the storm and heavy rains. While Doug was out looking for her, the police were also alerted to Lisa's disappearance. And it was Doug who would eventually find her car around 2:30 p.m., pulled over to the side of the Pali Highway. I really think this is interesting because if they called in the morning and he immediately went looking, there are not that many roads that go from the Honolulu side to Kailua. So it seems weird that they wouldn't have found it sooner, given that it doesn't take that long to drive from one side of the island to an hour. That would be about, or one side of the island to the other, it would be, I think, about an hour to drive from one side, if that. So I don't know about that. But Lisa's 1976 Toyota was found only 300 feet away from a payphone, a mile from her parents' house, and approximately 2 miles from her own apartment.
So this is the Pali Highway. It goes up the side of the mountain. There's some overlooks. Okay, so if you see here, for someone who just gotten their driver's license in a torrential downpour, these could be some quite dangerous roads to drive along, especially past midnight. But very beautiful stretch of highway as well. All right, now we are going up the Pali Highway from Kailua, and Lisa Au's car was somewhere between a mile away from Kailua because her parents' house, she was about a mile away from her parents' house when she stopped. She was also stopped very close to a telephone, but I don't think the telephone would be there anymore, obviously, since payphones don't really exist often. But anyway, imagine this in torrential downpour. My ears are popping now, so you can see we're getting some elevation, and it would be about a mile up this road where her car was found on the way from Honolulu.
Lisa was not found anywhere around the car, though, and when the police came there, there were a few things that seemed really strange to them about the scene. The first thing that they noticed was that the driver's side window on Lisa's car was rolled partway down, and the driver's side was completely soaked, and there was about 2 to 3 inches of water sitting at the bottom of the car. That gives an idea of just how heavy the rains were that night. So she had rolled down the window of her car and it had been left unlocked, or somebody had rolled down the window of her car, it had been left unlocked, and a lot of rain came in. But, and this part kind of gives me goosebumps. Lisa's purse was sitting on the front seat. Some reports say it was the driver's seat. I've seen another report that said it was the passenger seat. Anyway, both seats were wet from the rain, but the purse itself was reported as having been completely dry. That seems like an impossibility if the purse had been there on the seat the entire time. Another thing about the car that struck investigators at the time was that the car's battery was dead when they found it, but it turned out that the parking lights and the windshield wipers had been left running, so it makes sense that the battery would have died. But then when the battery was charged, everything seemed to be working with no problem. It appeared to be good working order, which indicates that Lisa seems to have very quickly, abruptly left the vehicle because she left the lights and the wipers on, but it wasn't that she pulled over because there was something wrong with the car or her car broke down. And although she was near a phone, she did not call for help. And she was also in walking distance from her parents' house, although would have probably been a very unpleasant walk in the pouring rain. But she also did not make it there. When a forensics team checked out the car, they made the determination that the car had been wiped clean, which is also suspicious, and who knows what kind of evidence could have been destroyed with the rain. So was the window left open on purpose to destroy further evidence? I don't know. Because of all these suspicious findings, the police immediately took action and conducted a widespread search for Lisa that started almost immediately. There were hundreds of volunteers who joined the search, including many soldiers, as Oahu is known for its large military presence. There is big military base there. There were lots of soldiers, and everybody was joining in on the search. There were over 150,000 flyers that were distributed around the island looking for any information, any sightings, any interactions with the young woman who was described as being 5'5" and 120 pounds. Despite these massive efforts, no leads turned up as a result of this search. It turns out it wasn't until days later, on January 31st, that the search ended when Lisa's body was found only 3 miles away from her boyfriend's sister's apartment where she was last seen. A man who was out for a jog with his dog on Tantalus Drive ended up smelling something foul and looked down into the ravine near him and spotted a nude body lying face down in the long grass of the ravine about 40 feet down. It had been 10 days since she had disappeared, but because of the heat and the humidity, as well as the insects and wildlife in the area, the body had been so badly decomposed that it was impossible to determine how she had died. And she was not able to be identified by her fingerprints, and ultimately it was her dental records and class ring that she wore that were instrumental in confirming her identity. So in just 10 days, the climate had that much of an impact on her body that they were not able to identify even who it was that they had found. This is where this case moves from completely tragic to just frustrating. There were attempts made to solve this case and determine her cause of death and who had kidnapped and killed her, but there were many errors made by police and investigators in the case, and we are still left with more questions than answers after all this time. There were 2 efforts made to determine the cause of death. One was right away when they found her, and another was a year later. Lisa's body was exhumed and her skull and jawbone were examined, but in both cases it was reported that the advanced decomposition of the body had made it difficult or impossible to draw any conclusions as to the manner of death. However, due to all the circumstances surrounding the case, Lisa's death was ruled a homicide, and police began looking for her killer or killers. I do want to note that although it is only 3 miles away from the boyfriend's apartment, I drove up Tantalus Drive. It is a very slow drive. Tantalus Drive goes up to Tantalus Point. It's like a summit of a mountain. So you're basically driving on this long, slow, windy road up a mountain. So the distance is very short. The drive itself takes kind of a while. There's lookouts on it, and it's very twisty, turny, slow going. Also fairly remote. This is a more remote area.
So this is very jungly, and the other thing that's striking me going up here is, one, this was the 80s. There's lots of overgrowth, and also the night that she went missing, it was torrential downpour. So this would have had very poor visibility, probably been a very difficult drive to go on to dispose of the body. There's a lot of switchbacks back and forth. It's very narrow in parts. It drops off sharply in other parts here. So that would have been a really intense drive. But Tantalus is very close to Lisa's boyfriend's apartment, where she was Lisa's boyfriend's sister's apartment, where she was partying that night. And she didn't leave there until 12:45, which would have been obviously the next morning. Then he was the last person to see her alive. I love the jungle look, though. It's very cool looking up here. And we are getting really high up on this mountain, but our ultimate goal is to go to Tantalus Drive, near where the trail to the summit is.
Although her killers have never been found, police did come up with a few suspects in the case and some interesting theories as to what happened to Lisa that night. Specifically, there are three main theories that have been put forward. One is that Lisa was killed by someone she knew, or she was killed by a stranger in a crime of opportunity, or she was killed by a still unidentified serial killer who was active around that time during 1985 and 1986, known as the Honolulu Strangler. Honolulu Strangler killed young women around that area in Honolulu, Waikiki area, and that case has never been solved. The Honolulu Strangler has never been caught, as far as we know, so we don't have answers on that. If it was a crime of opportunity by a stranger, it was also possible that she had some car troubles, which we kind of ruled out because her car seemed to be in perfect working order, or that being an inexperienced driver in a storm, she pulled over to wait it out a bit and someone saw an opportunity. Another idea is that someone was masquerading as a police officer and pulled her over, using the guise as a means to kidnap and kill her. I believe there was a witness who said that they were followed by someone with like a blue light that seemed like a police light that night. So there is some idea that it could have been someone masquerading as a police officer who pulled her over. Another idea is that Lisa's boyfriend at the time, Doug Holmes, was responsible for her murder. There were some slightly suspicious circumstances related to his involvement in her disappearance. For example, he was the one who first found her car after she was reported missing. If you remember, when he came upon the car, he claimed that there were several inches of water on the floor of the car from the rain, and the driver's seat was completely soaked. Yet Lisa's purse was on top of the seats and it was dry. Did he actually bring her purse there and plant it himself before he reported that the car was discovered? That is an idea. So at the time there was a lot of fake leads too, because people were saying, oh, everything was there except her driver's license. Somebody took her driver's license or she left the car with it. It turned out she had left her driver's license at the poke place when she bought poke. So that kind of threw people off, though, because it wasn't correctly reported at the time. Doug did end up failing 2 lie detector tests regarding Lisa's disappearance and claimed it was because he was feeling really guilty for letting Lisa leave that night to drive home herself despite the bad storm. So he was feeling responsible for her death in some way. There was also a witness who was near Tantalus Drive who claimed to have seen a man in a blue car, like the car that Doug drove, driving with a woman in the passenger seat who seemed to be asleep or unconscious. As someone who often sleeps in cars, though, I'm not sure how much weight to really put on this, and the claim also could not be verified. Ultimately, police determined that there was no apparent motive for Doug to have killed Lisa, and the case went cold. There was people saying that they thought they heard arguing that night from Lisa and her boyfriend, and that he had been wanting to break up with her. I don't know if that's a motive for murder. Also, if that was the case, then it seems like he would have killed her, brought her, since her body was found closer to his sister's apartment, he would have killed her there or something, and then dropped off her body in his car, and then driven her car and dropped it off himself. And then he would have had to get a ride from someone else, or he followed her in some way and got her pulled over or had her stop, and then kidnapped her and killed her and drove her in his car all the way back up to Tantalus. I don't know. The whole thing doesn't make a lot of sense. Maybe someone else can make sense of this for me. So to this day, the murder of Lisa Au remains unsolved. Was it a crime of opportunity, the work of a serial killer, or did Lisa's boyfriend end up killing her that night? With so much time having passed, I'm not sure we'll ever have an answer to this case or how Lisa died that night. It remains a cold case, but it isn't impossible that it may someday be solved. If you have any information about the case, please contact the Honolulu Police Department. Come forward with any information that you have. It doesn't matter how long it's been or how much time has passed. The family deserves closure.